Redditors who have been in prison, what's the most disturbing thing you've seen or heard in prison? I was in county jail, but in a rough part of Southern California. We had triple stack bunk beds in general population in just a large, open room. I had a middle bunk, and oftentimes at night guys would try to stealthily JRK off. The bed shaking is a dead giveaway, and usually you just try to ignore it. Well, one night I'm reading and the bed started shaking vigorously, which is not how you do it. As I was putting my book down to tell this dude knock it off, he fell off his bunk and cracked his skull open on the concrete floor. He had a seizure on the top bunk and fell down about 7 feet straight to the concrete head first. That was a gnarly sight to see. Edit: I really didn't think this needed to be said since it's spelled out for you guys. He was not masturbating. The shaking from his bunk was the seizure, which led him to rolling off and landing head first. Brazil. Once the lights went out, you'd start hearing scraping noises on the concrete. It was gang members sharpening their homemade knives on the concrete floor. Somebody was about to get killed when you heard that noise. Stuff straight out of hell. I worked in psych at a max security prison. I was the one who wrote the notes for the parole board making release suggestions. So perhaps if people want to be released, they shouldn't tell me all the gory details about how they want to cut my sweet mouth off then skull FCK me after I'm dead. The scary thing was seeing how often they were released. Some of the behaviors from those suffering from mental health issues were pretty disturbing. Inmates covering themselves in fecal matter or smearing it all over their cell was not entirely uncommon. Saw an inmate cover himself head to toe and also bite wounds into his wrists and pack those with SHT. One inmate cut a testicle out and slapped it against the cell window when the CO walked by. My fiancé worked in a prison and once saw a video of a guy being extracted from a cell. He wasn't cooperating, so they sprayed a ton of OC spray, like super pepper spray for those who don't know. There was so much that when he took his clothes off and threw them at the wall, his underwear stuck. Then this man started jacking off using the OC as lube and screamed, "Is it getting hot in here?" He saw a lot of FCAT up stuff and has tons of stories, but that definitely stuck with me. Legit crazy people who not faking but schizophrenic or something else wrong. Feel sorry for them cause other inmates will FCK them up. Dude sitting there rambling to himself every waking moment and guards just let the nutcase in gen pop to irritate everyone until someone shuts him up. Lots of crazy people need to be somewhere else but gen pop. Oh, and I was in group therapy and this dude had a ball in his hand when talking and I figured it was like something he got from commissary. Don't think much of it, then someone comes up to him holding a trash can. It was a ball of his own SHT. So what I'm saying is there was a dude who slept across from me. When he slept and turned his back towards me, his shirt would lift up and his would show. About a couple inches or so above the top of his crack was what appeared to me a stumpy tail looking thing. It moved. It F-King moved. I am not misremembering this. The F-King stumpy discovered calloused looking thing would wiggle, for lack of a better word. Not like a dog's tail, much slower and infrequent. I did not think it was under his control, but I did not ask him. He was in my pod for about a week then left. This was my first experience in jail, so I didn't talk about it, but I know at least one other person saw this. It was as FCAT up as you think. Does that help? Second night I heard officers screaming disengage over and over, and I looked at my cellie who had been down for 20 years for murder. What was going on? He told me that when they catch a couple of guys doing the deed they scream that to get them to stop. This same cellie started to growl like a dog at my foot while I was laying on the top bunk and then pretended to bite at my foot. When he did this, my toe went into his mouth, which caused him to gag. One time during count, these two guys started to make tattoo ink by burning baby oil, but they threw water onto it when it got too big and it spread all over their cell, so they were locked in the cell with flames covering the walls with them locked in it. They were about to get out in a couple of months, but ended up getting a 10-year sentence for arson after the incident. Probably seeing the lengths people will go to in order to get opioid replacement therapy like Bup or Suboxone, in order to either sell to someone else or because they're being intimidated to give their dosage to someone. Inmates have to swallow the liquid in front of a guard and nurse obviously, but they have figured out ways around this. Creating little paper catchments and sticking them in their throat, or just being empty-stomached and vomiting it up when they get back to their cells. Not me, but my brother. He was in and out of jail for a few months at a time for a number of reasons. Happy to say he's sober, out of a toxic relationship, and thriving now. but I remember the way he described the echo of screams and moans from the mentally ill people in the pitch black was so unnerving. It made me feel sad and terrified all in one, especially since the dark is one of my biggest fears. I spent a few days in a holding cell. I wasn't eating, going to the bathroom, nor was I offered a shower the whole time. I couldn't pass my health exam due to a fever, so I was never moved to Gen Pop. The drunk a-hole in the cell next to me screamed for I swear the entire 3 days he was in there. Swore up and down he wasn't drunk driving. I'm pretty sure this was very late into New Year's Eve night, and by the way the officers spoke to him he was a regular. I couldn't sleep or focus on my book. My Crocs had 32 holes in them and my cell was 14.5 bricks long. I was imprisoned for a few months in Brixton Prison, London. My cell was at the end of the oldest wing of the prison, built in 1836. One night, in the early hours, I was awoken by a noise outside my cell. It was the noise of a guard walking by and sounded like he was banging his truncheon on the rails outside my door, like a kid does along a fence with a stick. It was really irritating and I got out of my bunk and looked under the landing through the porthole in my door to see which one of the a-holes it was. I was surprised to see that there was nobody outside on the landing, though I could still hear the stick knocking. Next morning I mentioned this to some fellow prisoners, a couple of whom had also heard what I had. An officer nearby heard us and said, "Oh, that'll be old John up to his usual tricks." He went on to explain that old John was prison guard who loved to wake prisoners by banging his nightstick along the landing rails just to irritate them. Old John had been murdered by a prisoner in 1889. The officer went on to explain that when they hear old John is about they stay firmly in their landing office until the noise has finished. Not prison, but did a month in jail. My cellmate would steal the candy I bought from the commissary that I had hidden under my pillow when I was sleeping. I caught him once and we got into an argument. He threatened to rip off my head and SHT down my throat. This same guy was also making pruno in our cell. When I found out about it I told him to dump it out. He said he would slash did. But he just packed soap around it and hid it to hide the smell. I dumped it out on him when he was in the shower. During this same stint a guy from solitary was brought into our block. He got in an argument with his cellmate about who has top or bottom bunk. Solitary confinement guy was about 6 feet 3 inches. Other guy was about 5 feet 6 inches. Other guy had just come from the shower so only had a towel on with wet feet. Solitary guy threw one punch and absolutely laid him out. There was also a guy that came into our block that smuggled in Suboxone in his prison wallet. He SHT'd out in the shower, which set a bunch of us off. When the guards found out they started to take him out and he tried to make a run for it. I turned 21 in solitary confinement, was only put in for 2 weeks for passing contraband, King soups. The guy next to me had been in for months. The windows are frosted so you can't see outside into the world. The guards come by twice a day and point a taser at you while they tear your cell up. While you're naked. The screams at night from the guy in the cell next to me were so King heartbroken. It didn't sound human at all, just helplessness and sorrow. Sorry, I know you were looking for stories of fights and shankings, but the thing that disturbed me the most was listening to that man every night for those 2 weeks.